Good afternoon, and welcome back to the Kentucky Pro Football Hall of Fame interviews. We're happy today to have a young lady that knows something about football. It's Miss Kay Collier McLaughlin. And many don't realize that she's the daughter of one of the famous coaches, Blanton Collier. Blanton Collier is a coach that coached in Paris High School. The football field is named after him. He coached here at University of Kentucky and went on and was a tremendous coach at the Cleveland Browns. He is in the cradle of coaches, and so today we get a chance to talk to Miss Kay about what it's like to be the daughter of a coach. We love and we see the glitter and the glamour, but we're going to see today and hear today about what happens behind the scenes. Kay, we're glad to have you.
Thanks, Raymond. I tell you, it wasn't quite that glamorous as people might think it is. It was wonderful. One of the things that I grew up understanding is that the game of football is preparation for the game of life, and lots of things like that. I put in a lot of time at training camp, at practices, and he coached all sports at Paris, so we were always the last ones to close up the gym or leave the field. So, real familiarity with locker rooms and all those things. But a big thing is how the financial end of football has changed. People would be shocked to know that when he was coaching, the top salary in the SEC for a football coach would be $17,500.
Yeah, it's really interesting because when people associate with football, they immediately think of, oh, you made all that money and all the glimmer and the glamour. But, it's really not that way. And you recently did an article that featured a little bit about that. You're talking about college now, and we'll talk a little bit about the salaries in the pro. But go ahead and tell us a little more about how it was coaching in.
Well, in the college era, the things that would be so different than today, for instance, cheerleaders. If you had 10 cheerleaders, that was a big deal. And they were given one sweater, they paid for their own skirt, and they were all girls. And it lasted all 4 years of college. And, that's unheard of today. The budgets are so much bigger. And then if you move that over to the pros, when pro football started, it was a very small budget thing. Like they played 6 games a season, and they went back to their day jobs on Monday morning.
I think that's one of the things that's really interesting that many people don't realize is that even though they were out there knocking heads and beating their bodies together, again, it was part-time. They actually, as you're mentioning right now, went back to another job to make money for their family because the salaries weren't that great.
Well, that was true even through the 60s. And when the Browns won the World Championship pre-Super Bowl in '64, even Jim Brown was a rep for Pepsi. Chuck Noll, who later, came to Hall of Fame status with coach of the Steelers, he had a day job. They had teachers and insurance salesmen, and Frank Ryan, the great quarterback, was still in graduate school carrying around a 400-page textbook that had one math problem in it. So it was a different world. And as somebody from that era said, the idea of football as a career, all year round, was just not in their vocabulary or their potential. They had to make a living, pay their bills, and then get ready for training camp in a few weeks.
Yeah, much different. And obviously players now today are reaping the benefits of what price was paid so many years ago by so many of the other former players. And, one of the things that you dealt with your family is that right after, you were talking about in the 60s, right after the assassination of President John Kennedy, Cleveland at the time, when your father was coaching there, actually had to make a trip to Dallas during that era. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, actually, Dallas came to Cleveland. And that was the Sunday after the assassination. And it was amazing. The stadium was stripped of all the kinds of, things that you associated with a football game, from bands to flags and banners. And there were armed guards and on top of the stadium. And the PA announcers were told not to mention the word Dallas. They could say Cowboys, but they couldn't say Dallas. The players were all told to keep their helmets on at all times because the coaches had gotten a threat, call to the office saying, if you step on the field, you will be shot. So they were wearing bulletproof vests.
Wow. The price that was paid so many years ago, and now the fruits of the labor. Football today is a much different game. And salaries and so forth, the benefits, endorsements. Again, many people paid a dear price to be able to benefit like that.
Well, and one of the things I think people don't realize that early on, people were expected, players went both offense and defense. And so the squads were smaller. And then with competition in the leagues, as the leagues grew, then they were looking for specialists, so they had to have more players. And as the AFL came along, and then the USFL and Canadian League, all of these things, there was competition, and we know what competition does, and so players could demand more. But the other thing people don't realize is up until free agency, players were committed to one team for a long period of time. And if they were going to move, they did not benefit. If a player moved to another team, the team he left was paid. The player didn't see the money. So when free agency came along, then it became possible for players to benefit. And, you know, one of the things that I think people have to look at is that the real big money is the owners. And that money comes from TV contracts. And so players were saying, I think I want a piece of this pie. You know, I'm the one cooking it. And so how about getting our share? And I think it's really important to realize how short the average pro football career is.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. I think 4.5 years and you receive pension now. 3.5 years and you receive pension now. You know, one of the things that many aren't aware of is you just mentioned the fact about how free agency came into play. And again, we've been talking about those that went before some of the players that paved the way. You know, our very own Frank Minifield was one of the gentlemen that broke down the walls of free agency. He was obviously one of the greatest defensive backs to ever play in the National Football League. But Frank and a few of the other guys were the ones that challenged the NFL on free agency. They later won, and now you see football being what it is today.
Exactly, and that was a huge change point, and a lot of people don't know it, so I'm glad you mentioned that. It's just, I think, really significant in those 3.5 average years. It's a risky career. You know, we are entertained by it. Those of us who are involved in it are more than entertained, but it is one of the major entertainments, and many, many players have a shorter lifespan and some real physical disabilities. Now, they love the game, and most of them will tell you they would play it again, but it's still a high-risk career. And so I think people don't understand that. And it's just, I want people to know that story because, you know, here with the Hall of Fame, it's so important, we think, that we're doing something that just inspires kids. You know, to see our Hall of Famers go down to the Boys and Girls Club, they light up. They see the possibility, and that's worth everything. So, I don't know. I want these guys to get what they can get, and I want to acknowledge that they stand on the shoulders of people who came long before them and gave a lot to make the game that is today possible.
There's no doubt about it, and that's one of the things that the Kentucky Pro Football Hall of Fame does. We honor the past to preserve the future. And so with that in mind, again, Kay, we want to say thank you for spending so much of your time with us today, you know, being with us on the Kentucky Hall of Fame video. And we just want to say thank you so much, and thank you for what your dad has done for the game of football. And we just love having you be a part of this team.
Thanks, Raymond.